Welcome to the Expert's Journey podcast, where we're all about creating your path to impact. Join your hosts, Dixie Mary Carlton from Indie Expert Publishing and Mr. Web Marketing Brad Houck, as we look at how you can grow your business and influence by leveraging your knowledge for profit. Welcome to the Expert's Journey podcast. Today we're going to talk about one of the biggest challenges for experts and business owners, building a brand that stands out without burning out. If you've ever felt like you're constantly chasing content, stuck trying to stay consistent, or unsure how to express your voice online, this one's for you, my friendly speakers. We're breaking down how some AI tools can help you build a stronger brand, show up more often, and stay true to your voice without adding more to your plate. Good morning, Dixie.
Good morning, Brad. That sounds like a very big plate to have to unpack.
Yeah, it is. Look, we all know that the world has got busier and AI is supposed to make things easier for us. But I think in most people's cases, they're scraping the shallow end of AI because they've got so much else going on that it's just another thing to learn, and it can be quite confronting for them, even though it's really useful. So I suppose the key is looking at how can AI help us with our brand voice and using existing content to move our businesses on a bit.
It's a really useful tool, obviously, and I use AI for mapping out brand plans and marketing strategies, but I know I'm using barely a tenth of what you're probably using. So I'm excited to hear what you want to tell us about how to really maximize the use of AI for really developing that brand.
Yeah, look, there's so much happening in the area of AI currently, and that's to be expected. Things are growing really fast. And so the tools in the area of generative AI, which is the ability for AI to really think for itself, is exploding. And we're seeing the first of these new, what they call AI browsers come online. And basically, the AI is part of the browser. And so what you do on the browser, then AI can see into it. So for example, you can log into your Gmail account to look at your Gmail. The AI can read all your email while you're in there, that sort of stuff.
Wow.
There's a lot of that sort of thing happening. And that can be quite confronting. But on the other hand, it gives you really good abilities because it means you can log into other sites like Canva and connect together with AI, not just Canva AI, but actually external AI, and have it create stuff within Canva. So Claude, for example, can now integrate with Canva and create content. So lots and lots of things happening really fast. But let's pull it back a little bit because I don't want to go too deep. I think the first place, defining brand voice is always a good one. We talk about using AI to write things, and we all know by now that with ChatGPT, we can tell it stuff about ourselves. We can load files up to it. We can give it our bio. We can give it our books even, and it can learn about us and then start to write more like us and think more like us when we ask it questions. And we can, to me, this is a key one because one of the things I've seen, for example, in ChatGPT that I really is that you can create folders. Now, within those folders, you can have collections of chats, but you can actually upload files to those folders, and then everything that you refer to in those chats is around those files. So from building a brand perspective, it means that you can ask it anything you like based on what you've done in the past.
Yes.
Which brings it more in line with your voice. And also it can say, the other day you did a post about this. Why not a post about that? And so that's one of the things that I really like about this new system as it's starting to develop, is that rather than having a whole pile of random conversations and then have this little kind of brand voice that is overarching everything. So for example, when I'm writing about leadership stuff, I'm not talking about using AI and building your brand online, because it used to be that you had one sort of description of who you were. It would cross everything all over. So now you can get around that. So I'm finding that you can, because you can upload this stuff and because you can create information on there, you can actually build your AI so that it will use your brand voice in everything you do, whether you're writing new stuff or taking old stuff, you can build on that.
Which is so useful. It also means that you don't have to actually think quite so hard about everything that you're doing once you pick up each folder. So for example, if I'm working with a number of clients, I don't have to stop and refresh everything in my own brain about what I'm doing if I'm starting work with a new file that particular day that may relate to something that I'd worked on several weeks earlier or several days earlier. I don't have to carry quite so much in my head, which I find quite useful. Don't know if that's necessarily a good thing long term. What are your thoughts on whether or not it's forcing us to somehow dumb down or not retain information we should do?
Yeah, look, it's a good one. In fact, recently studies came out about that. And I'm sure you probably saw something about the fact that it is making us dumber. And I can see why when you really look at it, because if I've got my book loaded up there and then I go to AI and say, hey, can you go through my book and come up with 20 sayings that I can put on social media posts? That's a really useful tool for me to
Yes.
use, but I'm not actually using my brain. It's just spitting it out. So there's no real personal involvement in the development of the information. And I think in many cases, people don't even review the information that come out. They just assume that it's right. They read over it quickly and go, oh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And then I need something, so I'll push it out. So I can see how, not, I don't know about dumbing down, but certainly you're not necessarily taking the information in that you're creating. And a lot of the studies are related to, say, education. So, kids using it in school and using it at uni, that they're not actually learning the content. They're just regurgitating what ChatGPT is saying. They're not even regurgitating what the book says, which was what we did anyway. So it's like, I don't necessarily see a big difference in that.
It's about relearning how to learn and how to locate information rather than necessarily have to learn and retain everything, isn't it? And if it's a book that you've already created, or if it's a brand plan or strategy or blog post, for example, that you've already written and created in some format, and you're using AI to reformat or regurgitate what you've already developed, then, that's just a smarter way of working, some would say.
I think that's the thing. But I do see where you can get caught up in that loop of just producing content, but not really considering you just got to get something out. So, for example, I like Cast Magic because I can upload an audio file and it will produce a whole pile of different content for me automatically.
Yeah.
It's really good like that. But it's also, I'm not really thinking about it. But on the other hand, yes, if I need a worksheet to go with a podcast, I can upload it. It'll produce a worksheet containing 20 questions that I can share with people. So I think there's an understanding that you've got to look at this content and go, okay, I want to make some new content. I want to use stuff that I've already created rather than reinventing the wheel. How can I best use it in a way that's actually useful to my audience? And that's probably the key. I like to, for example, use AI to help me when I'm preparing for podcasts. So I'll get it to do some research for me. But my input comes into the command that I give it, the background information that I give it, how I control it. And I think a lot of times people just write something like, I'm going to do a podcast, give me something to talk about. Whereas I prefer to say, I'm going to do a podcast about this topic, and I want to make sure that I cover these main points, and I'll let's say 10 points that I think are important. Can you give me some more background information about those? Or can you structure those in a way that the flow is better? So I think looking at how you use AI is really important so that you have involvement in the process. By putting down those bullet points before I start, I've actually involved my brain in the process. So I'm not letting it tell me what I'm telling the world. I'm telling it what I want to tell the world, and it's giving me some structure and some
And that's the difference.
Most people hand over control to the AI, and I think that's where you make a mistake as a speaker, because now you're just actually telling people what the rest of the world, what it's learned from the rest of the world. It's not original.
No. And I think for all of us, if we're working in this experts industry, we have to retain our individuality, our own expertise, and own that, and retain our ability to stand behind our own expertise that we're sharing. Because otherwise we just become robotic versions of ourselves, or considered to be someone with no new, fresh, original ideas. And that's career success in this sort of industry.
Yeah. And look, producing on-brand content is not easy. You're looking at brand voice is a term we use all the time, but there's more to it than the brand voice. I think getting your AI to write like you, to write like a human, is not as easy as it sounds. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of training. It can be done for short sentences and social media posts and things like that. But the minute you start to expand the paragraphs, that's when you discover that it does write in an entirely different style to what you would. In fact, I'd say almost any human would.
Yes.
And it is more, I suppose, a printed form, a TV documentary style form, whatever it is, like a formalized style of writing, university writing even. But it's not how we talk or how we normally produce our content. And so even when you get content and you use AI to break it up and produce new stuff, like blogs and podcasts and emails and all that sort of stuff, you really do need to look over it and continue to train it.
Yes, continuing to train it. And I don't know if it necessarily is real when I think of it this way. Does it matter how often I'm using it to actually have it matter? Because if I leave it for, let's say I don't use a particular AI folder for maybe 3 weeks, does it start to lose its flavor versus if I'm using one that's almost daily, does it retain its memory of something better? Who's assuming that AI has any ability to tell the time?
Yeah, look, I think in the end it does go back, but the longer you leave it, I've noticed that if you call back to a conversation, it may have forgotten it. Even though it's in its group there, and even though you're still stored there, it's like it hasn't forgotten. It hasn't remembered. Sometimes you can, for the next day, you can go, yesterday I was talking about this. Do you remember that? And it'll give you a rundown, which is quite handy. But the one thing that I would say is that when you're working with AI and you're trying to get it to sound more like you, it is really important that you edit what it gives you and then give it back. When I work with a publisher like yourself, or when I was a teacher, kids would bring their work to me. I would scan it and I would go through it and go, oh, you need to fix this and this, and go back and fix that, then bring it back to me. And it's the same with you as a publisher. You go through and you edit things and you flick it back and say, look, I think you need to add this and add that. It's the same with the AI, but most people don't do this. They try to make the prompt better, but that is not the solution.
No.
You get the result of what you've edited, showing the edits, and then say to it, I have edited this piece. Please update your prompt
Right.
to include what your changes. And it will list all those things. Oh, I can see you did this and you did that. And then it will rewrite the prompt so that next time you're repurposing some content, you will get a much better output from the new prompt that's created.
So there's a couple of things you've just hit on for me. I don't use pre-saved prompts. I don't often even save my prompts because every time I sit down to do anything with AI, I want to approach it from a completely fresh perspective. So I'm not regenerating the same kind of outcomes. I will sit down anytime I'm using AI and start fresh. I'll still be using, obviously, if I have a folder that's trained with my voice and trained with me, but I won't pull up a list of prompts that I've saved and use those. I will start fresh each time with prompting. And I find that helps. But the other thing that I also find helps is that if I take any project that I'm doing in small pieces, rather than trying to get something to, for example, the other day I wanted to do a set of a dozen LinkedIn posts based on a particular book. So I approached it to give me a summary of 12 posts, topics. Then I asked it for one at a time, individual 300-word version and 600-word versions of each individual one, went through those and then went through the next one and the next one. Now, it still took me probably a couple of hours to do all of that, which otherwise it would have taken me a couple of days. But it kept me and AI specifically on point with the actual project we were doing at that point in that time. And the results were outstanding. And I couldn't fault the voice, the style, the content, the focus. And while I still had to go through and make sure I had completely humanized each part, I had a very good, succinct set of documents that I could use over the next couple of months in this particular way that I was looking for. But it's piecemeal stuff. And I think sometimes you are still going to get your best results when you approach it from a slow and steady rather than a fast and furious angle.
Yeah, I think that you got to remember that this is machine learning at its basics. And the bottom end of this is machine learning. So what you train it to do is what it'll do. What it does is what it's been trained to do. So when you start fresh every single time, a lot of times you're actually, starting almost like a clean slate. So you got to reteach it every time. Whereas, yes, within, say, folders on ChatGPT where you can give it background information and all those sorts of things, you can set tone and language and all that. Creating good prompts and storing them is an absolute essential if you want consistency and you want good quality output. Because what you're doing in a way is every time you're going in there, you're going up to a year one and trying to teach it to speak.
Oh, okay.
Whereas if you have prompts, it has learned what you want and then put that into that prompt. That prompt kind of sets them, automatically says you're a year 5 student, not a year 1 student sort of thinking.
Okay.
But the real key, most people do not ask the AI to write the prompt for them. So you can give it a piece of text and say LinkedIn post. And I've given it, say, 50 different LinkedIn posts that I liked the style of. They were very similar. There was certain consistencies with them. I fed that into them and I said, okay, look through these. This is a series of LinkedIn posts. I really like the style. Please tell me what you understand from looking at them. And it came back and it gave me a framework of wording and layout and emojis and all this sort of stuff. And I said, great, excellent. That's fantastic. Now write me a prompt that I can give you a keyword or a phrase or a sentence, and you can then write posts in that style. And it will then create the prompt. Now, you got to remember, it knows itself better than you will because it's actually a machine. So therefore, it knows that there's certain words that it uses for tone, for example, that, and like the word is temperature, for example, that actually uses to define difference between things. But the temperature, it knows what they mean. You don't normally use that language, so it will write you a prompt. And then you can test that. And then I go and edit it and give it back and say, okay, now adjust that prompt. And that's what I then will take and copy and paste and store in a text file. Because the next time I now have a consistent prompt. It won't always work perfectly, but it will give you a faster result based on the work you've already done. So if you like to think of it, it's like training your PA to do something.
Yes.
You spend
That's
all
a
that
good
time
point.
training them, and then you come back in the next day and you start at zero again. Like we
Yes.
just don't do that. So if you can think of it in that way, whereby creating the prompts is all preparing someone in advance, and you can then also get it to give you more information to put into the background information for that folder or for your settings, so that every time it comes through to write, it's actually drawing on that style.
That's a really interesting point, and I like that. I think it's quite brilliant. But this also then brings me to the next point. If you are using a chat that you're going to maybe share with a collaborator or a VA, for example, how do you approach that style of situation where you may have someone else be part of a particular chat file?
I suppose if you're both approaching it from the company's perspective, from a brand perspective, you're obviously going to expect similar things. But one thing, I suppose, you could take it up to the next level, and that's where you create like your custom GPTs or your assistants, whereby they are pre-programmed with those prompts, with that background information, with the example files and all that, so that when you're using that, it's set up in a nice little bubble of its own. And no matter who's using it, it's going to react a very similar way.
Yeah.
And that's probably the best way to do it. But if you create a series of custom GPTs for specific jobs, then, you go to the blog one when you want to write a blog, you go to your podcast one when you want to write a podcast, or if you want to give it a podcast and get it to do things, then you create one that does that.
Yeah.
So it's like creating a little team. We call them AI agents now.
Right.
And you really are creating these little agents. And as we're moving into generative AI, agents are becoming very much at the front of things. And we're starting to see where, with Siri, you can just go, hey, Siri, do this. We're going to be able to do that with AI soon. We're just going to throw something at it and we're going to say, can you take this, turn it into a blog article and send it to my personal assistant? And it will take that, it will write it, and then it will go into your email program and email it to the person. So we're moving very quickly currently, but when we train our AI and we get it all done, and then we bring in the generative and the AI agents on top of that, you now have a team of AIs that you can start to use.
Yeah. That's a really good point. You've talked about, I know we're about to wrap this up, but you've talked about a couple of platforms that I just made some notes of. Do you want to add to any of this list? You talked about Claude, Cast Magic, AI Help Me, and of course AI agents. What other?
Yes.
On our victims.
All of the platforms are going forward. So you've got Gemini, which is Google, and it's doing a lot. There's a lot going on there every day, literally, with Google. Claude, of course, is Anthropic. And then you've got ChatGPT, which is my personal favorite. But then, for example, I'm playing with a new one called GenSpark, GenSpark, which is a generative browser. And it's quite incredible what it's starting to do. And some tools like GenSpark actually allow you to tap into all the different AI. So I can use Claude, or I can use Perplexity, or I can use OpenAI, whatever. Yeah, it's a case of always choose the one you like, but I keep trying the tools and I find different things. But I think what's happening at the moment is if you learn to use one of those, Gemini or OpenAI, ChatGPT, and learn to use that, that's where I recommend most people play. But over the next year, you'll start to see those explode. Even OpenAI has now released a new tool as part of ChatGPT that you'll see as a super agent. And they'll all start to bring these things in. So you won't have to go everywhere to get everything you want, is probably the best way to put it. You won't need 1,000 tools because the main companies have got so much money, so much power that you'll actually be able to continue using Gemini or continue using ChatGPT as they bring in the ability to change everything.
Can you just repeat that last piece that you said? Because we paused in the middle of that sentence.
Oh gosh. So all of the tools are moving forward because of the massive amounts of money being spent on AI. So if you choose one that you like, I like ChatGPT, for example, and you continue to get really good at using that to create content for your business and to train it and create prompts. As these new generative AIs and AI agents and things like that come into play more, then you will find that you will be able to access those through that tool because they are all continuing to add them. You won't need to go to 100 different tools to do things. Is probably the key thing.
Fantastic. That's music to my ears. That's a good place to leave it today, Brad. But I think we should talk more about some of these great platforms and ideas.
Excellent. Thank you for tuning into the Expert's Journey podcast. If you picked up some useful tips today, take a moment to subscribe and share this episode with a fellow speaker or expert in your network. It really helps us reach more people. And don't forget to check out our books on Amazon. Dixie's Start with a Draft, How to Easily Plan and Write a Nonfiction Book, and my book, Microcourse Profits, Build a 7-Figure Income with Bite-Sized Courses. Both are packed with practical tools and tips to help you grow your business faster. Catch you next time. And remember, keep smiling.
Indeed. Thanks, Brad.